Volume 7 C43. The mountains of the dwarves loomed so large that even craning her neck all the way back Evil Eye could not see the peaks. Clouds drifted by and the endless snow kept the stones forever buried. The wind swept down over the stones and brushed against the bodies of the party, and cloaks were either clutched tighter to the bodies of the travelers or billowed backwards like they were going to be carried away. Gagran, Lake Hughes, the twins, Lupu and Moman immediately clutched the heavy cloth closer to their bodies. Evil Eye, however, did not right away. Shit. She cursed when she saw that the others did so. They shivered a little in the snow-chilled wind of the mountains, but for the undead, what was the coldest wind? Nothing, just another breeze. She clutched the thick red cloak to her body and pretended to shiver like the rest of them. "Are your clothes not enchanted against the cold?" Moman asked the party, and Lake Hughes shook her head, her teeth chattering just a bit. No. Magic items are expensive. Our gear is enchanted against cold wounds, but against everyday weather? No, it's not. Simple comfort isn't worth it. Bet you're second-guessing that choice now, eh? Lupu said with a chuckle. The cleric's own nature as a werewolf provided natural resistance to weather such as this, and she couldn't help but feel more than a bit smug, stretching out and letting her cloak billow and flap behind her for a moment. "How come you're so damn comfortable?" Gagran asked, shivering like a leaf but without Lake Hughes's chattering teeth. "I'm used to a lot worse weather than this. We haven't even climbed up that thing yet." Adamantite adventurers, huh? You'd fight a dragon and call it a day, but a little nip in the air and you're all shivery and want nothing but a warm beer and a hot fire. Which actually does sound kinda good. "Let's go," Lupu said and pointed toward the top of the mountain. "Go where?" Evil Eye asked. "Do you know the way?" Every head collectively turned toward Lupu, and the red-haired cleric shrugged and said, "If you plan on pointing dramatically, you do not have to point in the right direction." She cackled and laughed and the entire party raised their eyes to the sky and groaned with exasperation. "But yes, I do," Lupu added. "The path is overgrown, but it's this way." "How do you know, evil cleric?" the twins asked at once. They wore their typical blank expressions, but they had a tiny hint of curiosity in their voices when they bestowed Lupu with their new nickname for her. "Simple, dwarves dig deep, but they always put their entrances up high. This is the only path going up, and dwarves tend to build around nature. Kinda like elves that way, I guess," Lupu said with a shrug. "Okay, that was bullshit, but easier than explaining that I can smell them on the path here." She flashed a V for victory sign at the two, who traded questioning looks at one another before they gave a collective shrug. "Go on, evil cleric," the pair said, and Lupu took the first step on the hard dirt path. The dirt crunched underfoot, and with nothing else for it, the group wandered their way upwards along the long and winding path. Evil Eye held herself back behind Moman as they went upward in a single file. The freezing wind got worse as they continued the steady ascent, but, much to the relief of the party, there were alcoves dug into the mountainside with thick oaken doors. Not large by any means, but large enough that they could all sit down. The walls of these alcoves were coated with a shiny dark substance that reflected the light of the embedded glowstones which were embedded in all three sides. "What is this stuff?" Moman asked, and removing his glove, he touched it and rubbed the smooth substance between his fingers. It was smooth and had the faint odor of wood. "Sleep seed oil," Lake Hughes answered. "It's used for insulation in some places. It helps hold in the heat. Not much gets through it. I've heard some tribes even use it to harden vines which they turn into armor. But that's way far away from here, or must be because I've never seen it myself." "HMPF, interesting," Moman said, and sat down with the others. Whatever it was, it worked. The heat of their bodies began to rapidly warm the alcove. "Clever of them to use it like this, making a safe rest spot for travelers," Evil Eye said and inched closer to Moman. "Yeah, no need for body heat close by, or even another person," Lupu said with a smarmy little grin on her face when she shot Evil Eye a look. The vampire girl stiffened and inched no closer. "It says a lot that they provide these," Lake Hughes said as her body relaxed when warmth began to return comfort and feeling alike to her limbs. She rubbed her hands together to accelerate the process while she spoke. The chattering of her teeth was gone, and she sounded much more herself. "They must be really looking to be more open. That explains the influx of dwarf goods on the market." "So you think they'll welcome outsiders?" Gagran asked with a downward glance at her leader. "Probably. You don't think so? Lake Hughes looked up beside her and the square-headed behemoth of a woman thought it over. I dunno, I mean, people who hide themselves under a mountain can't exactly be the most neighborly. You know? I'm just not hoping for too much, better not to get our hopes up about a warm welcome. Gagran answered with a blank expression, but otherwise, she gave it a relaxed half-shrug. The Allfather supposedly rules there, he's supposed to be very open-minded. I think we should be more than optimistic. He's alleged to be a genius of magic, some even say he's like a god. And if he's really capable of the spells I've heard he uses, then he's no different than one. Evil Eye countered her big sister immediately, but Lake Hughes was quick to throw in as well. A god? I don't know about that, and I've heard he's actually using undead labor in some places. The undead are vile, disgusting creatures that have to be put down. Using them, consorting with them? I've heard he's very impressive, but I think it's better to be cautious. Anyone who tolerates necromancy is deeply suspect at best, Lake Hughes said with a sharp nod, and Evil Eye went silent. She felt herself deflate completely. It wasn't the first time her beloved sister had said something of that sort. A priestess of the water god, Evil Eye knew all too well the stance her sister had toward the undead as a whole and necromancy in particular. Lupu's eye was on her, Evil Eye could feel it even though she wasn't looking. Tell them? How can I tell them? How do I reveal something like this to people who would have helped kill my kind for so long? She had no idea. None at all. But as she felt Momon's warmth so tantalizingly within reach, Evil Eye knew, and resolved, one thing for sure. I will find a way. Volume 7 C44. Raymond finished writing the letter, though he did so without his usual flourish. It was slow, even sluggish, with the occasional quick jerking motion as his anxiety ramped up again before he could force it back down. Fighting vampires is easier. I'm going to have to explain this to my colleagues. That was going to be a chore without end. Berenice is reasonable enough, but Dominic is rash, hot-tempered, and doesn't see much beyond the present. Ginadine will get past this as I frame it as a matter of law. But Maximilian? Not to mention the Pontifex? The whole matter was a combination of dread and frustration. If they'd just listened to me then everything would be so much easier. Raymond cursed their stubborn heads, each one headed a different scripture, and so each brought with them the experiences and perspectives of that scripture's purpose. But none of them are the black. Raymond thought with great pride. The best of the best, the strongest of the strong, more cunning than the Holocaust scripture, more stealthy than the Windflower scripture, more loyal than the Late Sunlight scripture. Nobody can beat the black. You'd think being in charge of them would have lent my words some weight when I came back from observing the destruction of the Baharuth Empire's army. But no. He rolled his eyes at their responses. He would have to have the power of the six. He would have to be a god himself. You must be mistaken. Only the fact that Thousand-Mile Astrologer was watching and made an identical report, changed their minds. The Allfather is, if anything, even more impressive. But he hasn't claimed to be a god. Then again, did the Six ever claim it either? Raymond ran through every line of the Book of the Six. He memorized it years before, and... no, they hadn't. He rubbed his forehead. What are you doing, Raymond? Just running over pointless things in your mind. Trying to distract yourself from the real problem. The demi-human, the traitor to humanity, being treated as a peer by the other human monarchs was bad. That would have been unthinkable even 3 years ago. Has everyone forgotten that? He wondered, and it brought him to the thing which was worse. For his conscience. Goblins riding into our border, entering the elf kingdom in search of a missing human monarch? Demi-humans searching for a missing human monarch? The ground might as well have been shaking beneath his feet. And as he finished the last letter and heated the wax to affix his seal to them all one by one, his fingers had a tremor to them that was not there before. Zeshi. Gods above, I wish you were here. Are you all right? Are you lost? In more ways than one? The tap, tap, tap noise of wax dripping down on the cream-colored paper kept time with his thoughts, and he brought his seal down onto the first letter, marking it as permanently as a tombstone. The enchanted sealing wax cost a fortune to prepare, but now that his mark was there, it wasn't going anywhere. That poor girl. If the human she went with reveals what we've kept from her, and he probably has. What must she think of us? Of me? 20 years I've been hiding the truth from her for humanity's sake. Now she finds out my country isn't that different from a whole kingdom of elf kings. He shivered. It was that or wipe them out. The old thought comforted him more than once, whenever his conscience nagged at him about the all-too-human terror, fear, and pain on the faces of the elves. He told himself again and again, this is the kind of fate, at least they get to live. But never once did a moment pass that he didn't flinch when he saw a half-elf other than Zushi. There's no other way. He told himself again and put his head in his hands and elbows on the table. There's no other way, he shouted to the empty room. There's not, he shouted again. His mind betrayed him. It carried him back to the hateful stare of the crop-eared elf woman he saw on the street, arm held firmly by a human man, together, but hardly a loving couple. She remembered him, and though he denied it often, he remembered those he captured on his missions as the war went on. I never touched them, he told himself, but the hateful glare of the elf woman back at him as he rode past in his carriage, and the growing belly she sported, did not trouble his conscience less. He brought his fist down on the table, shattering it in two and knocking it down to the floor hard enough that the two halves broke again on impact and his letters scattered and floated about the room until the weight of the wax carried them to slide along the floor. Damn it! He grumbled as he looked at the mess he made. He went about the room bending over and picking up letter by letter authorizing entry and passage through the slain theocracy unobstructed, and informing all military authorities that even non-humans were to go unmolested for the duration of their task. When it was done, he went to the small rope his upper-class room was equipped with and gave it a tug. Somewhere on the far end a bell was ringing which would summon a servant that would send word that his authorizations were ready. In turn another servant would be sent from the king and queen that would pick them up, and then that servant in turn would bring the letters back. Roundabout as it was, the niceties had to be observed. I could just take it myself, but going uncalled for would be bad form. Raymond thought with a small hint of annoyance before he went to his bed and lay down. He set the letters on the nightstand beside him and picked up the Book of the Six. Its passages often helped quiet his troubled mind in his darkest hours. The feel of the pages, the weight of them all, it wasn't a thick book, but the pure white leather cover always felt good to hold. Raymond quietly recited the words within to himself until a servant appeared at his door. Young, as most of them were, he took directions well and was gone after no more than a few words. He went back to reading until a surprisingly short period of time later there was a knock on his door. Enter, Raymond said, and his face twisted in a mix of shock and dismay. It was the dragonid Queen of Frost who entered his quarters. You've got letters for us, good. I half expected you to worm out of it somehow, Nia said with respectful nod, her tail undulating behind her as she drew closer to where he lay. Raymond sat up instantly and slid his legs off the side of the bed, setting his book down on the pillow as he rose up. You? Not a servant? He asked. Is that what passes for a question in your head? Nia chuckled, shamelessly exposing her sharp and predatory teeth. Raymond shook his head hard enough to cast off the dismay. What I mean is, why are you here? To pick up these, Nia said and reached for the stack. Why are you here and not a servant? There's protocols. Raymond retorted and pursed his lips into a disapproving line. As she began to read over the letter on top, she answered him, I was a soldier before, a scout, a ranger, if you want to think of it that way. I worked on my own. When you work by yourself, your protocol becomes, does something need to get done? Yes? Then do it. And that's all. You expect different out of a beast? She snapped at him in a thick, sarcastic voice with a condescending smirk. Just take them and go. They're all there. Raymond answered with a wave of his hand toward the door, refusing to take the bait she offered him. Without checking them? No way. I don't trust that you wouldn't set up my people, or Henry's people, to be killed, Nia said and kept her eyes roaming over the paper before moving the top letter to the bottom and reading the next in the stack. The traitor to humanity worries about treason? I shouldn't be surprised. Raymond retorted and stood up. He went to a small countertop and walked behind it. From down below he drew up a large opaque green bottle with a narrow lip and a big round body over a flat base. Traitor to humanity? Nia said without looking at him as she read over the letter. It was humanity that betrayed me first, human. I was loyal. I was faithful. I protected my country when it threw me away to die. My only crime was keeping what I thought were supposed to be virtues. Virtues like mercy to the weak, kindness to the poor, sacrifice for a greater cause. I believed all that, and I lived it. right up until the moment that bitch's sword was shoved into my guts. Raymond popped the cork on the bottle and took out a metal flagon. He poured the red wine himself and took her words in silence. You say that, but you also invaded your former country, abandoned your humanity, and killed. How many humans? By my estimate, 70,000 humans died in the war. Naya answered, and 30,000 demi-humans. But it could have been much more. She admitted, and I didn't abandon my humanity by choice. This, she waved a hand up and down her dragonid body, was a consequence of dragon blood being used to save my life after Remedios tried to kill me. A side effect, I guess. I do like it though, the wings are nice. She popped the wings out to their fullest span to show them off, and even reached out a finger to stroke their fine firm leather. Raymond took a long draught of his flagon and retorted, so you killed more than you protected. He answered, though he filed away the rest of what she said for later consideration. So our conclusions about how she came to be this way were all wrong then. Only after they started it. Naya shot back, I sent peace envoys. I wanted to start up a peaceful trading relationship. Instead my envoys were murdered and their heads put on spikes on the wall. What should I have done? What would you have done in my place? Don't answer with a lie, Cardinal. We both know the truth. Rather than lie, he said nothing. Even a beast can love her own. Naya added. What about your human slaves? Raymond answered back with a flash of anger, you kept and enslaved tens of thousands more after the war ended. Naya snorted and crossed her arms in front of her chest. Who told you such a lie? We have our sources, we know that large numbers of prisoners were taken, and a lot fewer went home afterward. Did you just kill them instead? Raymond snarled at her with sudden fury. Naya's glare bored into his skull, as if she were looking through him. I have. No. Slaves. She bit off each word like she was gnawing on hardtack and the silence stretched between the pair. So, like any beast you just killed them all. Raymond glared back as best he could, the unmitigated evil in her eyes loomed like an angry dragon. If I just killed her. Wait, so if she did that, why offer to help now? He was just starting to wonder that, when she denied that as well. No. After the war ended, I had a lot of farmable land and not enough people to till it, so I offered every prisoner of war their own plot of land if they would stay, and I put them under the former Duke Astraco of the Southern Holy Kingdom. I suppose you could call him my Minister of Human Affairs if you needed a title for it. I don't believe you. Raymond answered and poured another drink. One rules the other, one kills the other. There's no way humans and non-humans can live side by side like that. No way. There's not. You're repeating the same old lies I heard my whole life. Naya barked back, but where the hell do you think you are? She yelled at him, you had to have seen it here, outside your damn window if you care to look. She pointed her free hand to the window, the talon at the tip of her finger raking the air until her arm trembled with rage when it came to a stop. Deem Albion is no different. I don't hate humans. I was born one. I didn't ask for this, I didn't ask for any of what happened. But things got complicated, and we found a way to make them work afterward. Same here, I guess. Your faith is nothing but lies and hatred. Hatred and lies. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. She almost screeched it, her wings shook with fury and her tail lashed behind her as her arm slowly lowered to her side. Raymond looked toward the window where she pointed, approached, and drew the curtain over it without thinking, darkening the room a little. You're lying, he said again. This place is a fluke held together by the desperation that made it into a country. In a few years the demi-humans will be rampaging and killing humans again, that's how it's always been. Send someone to my country then. If you won't believe me, if you won't believe the very eyes of Queen Kalka, send an envoy to tour my homeland and see for yourself that I don't lie, Naya said to him, and after a deep breath, she calmed. I pity you. I'm sorry? Raymond said, unsure if he understood her properly. He returned to the bar and poured himself another drink. I said, I pity you. You're not that different from me. A defender of humanity through and through, you've been in danger countless times and come through it all. You killed and fought battles and lived to tell about it, and now here you are, a man in middle age. You've done so many terrible, awful things, haven't you? But you live with it because you're convinced you had no other choice. That there was no other way but the way you chose, Naya said and shook her head, but all that's going to change, Cardinal. Someday soon, Sooner than you think, reality will hit, and all the guilt you're hiding from behind the shield of necessity will crush you beneath it when you find out it was all a lie. She turned and headed for the door, tail lashing behind her, and snapped it shut. Raymond looked at the curtain-enclosed window, and reached for the bottle to top off his flagon again. Volume 7 C45. After the first of Queen Draudillan's people spoke, it was like a dam burst. The rest began to speak not long after. At first what passed for speaking was instead steady sobbing, but even that, the Queen was grateful for. "Drink," the small Queen said, and held the cup to her maid's lips. The bloody split was wiped clean to ensure the young woman wouldn't be forced to taste her own blood in the water she drank. The woman's head rested in the Queen's lap, and near at hand an elven woman was applying a wrap to that same maid's black and blue bruised up thighs. "Major Resty?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it was her queen hovering over her. The diminutive red-haired woman swallowed the water, her bright green eyes wide open and alive at last. "Yes. Don't worry, I've convinced him that he needs to leave all of you alone for a little while," the Queen said in a quiet little voice. It was the best I could do. Buy you time." The white-haired Draudillan shivered throughout her body. "I'm sorry, I let you all down. I failed you. Majesty. Your Majesty. You stayed with us?" she whispered, and reached up a disbelieving hand to touch the cheek of the Queen. There wasn't one servant in the palace that hadn't grown up with the royal line, and yet somehow it was still not believable to her that her lady was present. "Of course. I can't abandon you," Draudillan answered. She gave the strongest smile she could, but it was fragile, weak. "Drink. You'll need your strength." The woman choked on the water she was given. It burbled past her lips and ran down the sides of her warm, flushed face. Draudillan patted the woman's back until the maid regained control, then tried to give her water again. This time it ran down the woman's throat instead. "Ah, it stings," she rasped out. "It can't be helped," the elven attendant said with a tender touch that didn't linger on the bruised flesh longer than it took to wrap it. "The king has been using his mana to make us travel faster. He's rougher on us. Punishes us when he has to do any work himself. The magic casters with healing magic drain their mana quicker, so we must make do with herbs for now. I'm sorry." The woman's ears twitched, and the maid gasped. "Elves. Right, the fight. We were taken." It slowly returned to her. Draudillan could see it behind the woman's eyes as she came back to herself. "Where are we now?" she croaked. "Most of the way toward our winter. My husband is one of the wagon drivers. He says we'll reach the city tomorrow." The elven woman answered. "A human city? I wonder what that's like," she said, and all three wondered the same thing. "I wonder if there's a way to escape." Heinz held his son in his arms as Kalka straightened her dress, concealing her breast after having nursed the boy. Aurelian was sleeping soundly, and at their side stood Albedo, the delicate-looking and radiant woman who was as beautiful as she was obviously inhuman. The All-Mother's wings batted a little bit, and then she spoke. "You say you wish to see the place your son will spend part of his life?" "I do, All-Mother. I do. He is the prince, and, not that I would ever doubt his father's magnificence, but what mother wouldn't rest easier if she saw for herself?" Queen Kalka answered, and then asked two more questions. "Is it really possible to be there immediately? And, more importantly, do you truly want your own child to travel with mine?" "It was my husband's idea," Albedo answered with a flippant wave. "He says they are going to be siblings and shouldn't be parted from one another. His wisdom is transcendent, so it must be right. I do see some advantages to it, but, as a concession to me, the time apart will be 3 months rather than 6, alternatingly." Kalka put a hand over her breast and sighed with relief. 3 months isn't so much, and if that travel is truly instant, it can be longer or shorter, and we never need to be more than a few seconds away. Exactly. It would be cruel to make them spend most of their lives apart from one another, and Aurelian's siblings should grow up knowing the whole of the lands they will help to govern. Ainz chimed in while rocking his son a little. "Long ago, my dear friends Bukubukushagama and her brother, Peroncino, used to argue often, but it was always done with love and affection. They cared much for each other, and it showed even when they fought. I can only hope that Aurelian and his little brother or sister are as fortunate." Ainz's obvious nostalgia and enthusiasm for his past friends caught Kalka off her guard. It was only at that moment that she realized, as much as I like him, as much as I revere him as a king and the one who saved my country, as much as I enjoy him as a lover and am thankful for him as my child's father, how much, or how little, I really know him. I didn't know that until just now. I thought of him as just a foreigner who rose to power, but he had a whole lifetime before the throne. I want to know more about him. These friends Kalka began, but Ainz didn't notice. Gate, he cast the spell and a whirling vortex appeared in front of him. When you pass through this, you will be in my home. It was built by my friends and I over the course of some wonderful years. You will see almost no humans there, but don't be frightened, none will harm my wife. Ainz promised, and when he held out his free hand, Kalka took it as Albedo clung to his arm, and they stepped through the vortex as one. What in the name of all the gods? Kalka looked around, disbelieving. A great tree stood in the distance, an endless sky, a perfect breeze, a lake shimmered in the light of the sun, the water lapped at the shore, and not far away a forest stood tall, thick, and strong, like the children of the great tree coming together. A pair of small dark elves were splashing each other in the water while a frost dragon wearing, of all things, glasses, lay curled up like a dog and napping, snoring in a steady fashion that made it sound like a cat's purr, but ramped up to a low thunderous rumble. The noise of splashing water and shouting children was only made more idyllic by the sheer absurdity of seeing the dragon lying there asleep. My husband. Is that a dragon wearing reading glasses, or some kind of illusion? Kalka asked. She brought a hand up to her face and rubbed her eyes one by one and gave her head a vigorous shake, and yet the absurdity was still present for her to see. Ainz and Albedo laughed at once, drawing the eyes of the dark elf children who waved happily from the waters and rushed to the shore, casting waves about in their eagerness to reach the quartet to join them. Hejinmal, come here, Ainz said, and the dragon's eyes snapped open at once. My lord. The dragon said and scrambled over to where Ainz stood waiting. The dragon bowed his head lower and when Ainz held out a hand, the dragon pressed his head upward against the downturned palm. Hejinmal, this is my wife, Queen Kalka of the Roble Holy Kingdom. You remember her from the conference where we found your father again? Ainz asked. The dragon turned toward the queen, and she gasped. Your control over him was permanent? Kalka asked, though her voice was calm, even regal, her eyes twitched as the impossibility was presented to her. Hejinmal isn't under a spell, Holy Queen, Albedo said with pride and extended her hand in a gesture toward the dragon's lowered head. Hejinmal is a loyal servant of the Kingdom of Nazarick, grateful to the Allfather for his assistance in saving his family and himself. Can that be true? Kalka looked with wonder at the creature just as the dark elf children reached them and knelt before the Allfather. It is, my lady, and I am grateful to my lord for all his help. I serve as one of Lady Aura's mounts. Hejinmal replied with no small pride. Though he couldn't grin, it was hard not to note the enthusiasm with which he spoke when he kept the scales of his head rubbing against the palm of the Allfather. That's why he's not fat anymore, Aura said with a large, childish grin on her face. Sister. It's mean to say that, don't be rude. Maya answered with a sideways glance and clenching the staff he'd snatched up from on the shore. Water dripped off their bodies, and Kalka took a closer look at them. They wore one-piece clothing of dark blue with numbers across the chest, but notably the clothing was tight to the skin and seemed to have stretched in a way unfamiliar to her. Noting the way she glanced at their clothes, Aura added, "This is a gift from Lord Perarancino to our creator, Lady Bukabaku Shagama." She picked at the clothing, drawing it away from her skin and letting it go so that it snapped back with a wet fap noise against her body. He called it a school swimsuit, though we don't exactly know why his sister was mad at him over it. She bonked him on the head with a tree. We like them. They're very nice. But, creator? Like a parent? Kalka asked as her mind spun. Kind of. But we were created by magic, not by our hugs. Mare explained. Kalka began, and Albedo cut her off. With the exception of a few outsiders invited here for special purposes, such as yourself, Queen of Men, all the beings of Nazarick were spoken into existence by the Supreme Beings. Spoken. But, husband, is this true? Kalka asked and turned to Ainz in part to escape the contented serene expression of the one radiant winged woman. It is. Ainz explained. You served gods? Kalka stammered. No, Queen of Men, Albedo said and shook her head. Kalka felt her racing heart begin to slow down in relief even as her mind continued to roil in confusion. Her wings popped out wide and her arms went out as if to embrace the human queen, her smile glorious as she said, "He ruled gods." Volume 7 C46. Kalka looked from her husband to their child, from their child to the kneeling dark elves, from the dark elves to the All-Mother, and from the All-Mother to the dragon. See created? Ruled gods. This. Kalka felt her knees weaken. "I need to sit," she said as her legs began to shake and their ability to support her became doubtful. She went down swiftly, barely catching herself with one hand. "You were created by magic?" she asked of the twins, who nodded at once. "And why you, his other wife? That is why you are so perfect?" Kalka asked, turning her eyes to Albedo. Albedo preened with pride and put a hand on her own cheek, leaning into tilting her head into the touch, her wings fluttering. "Yes, I was created by Lord Tabula Smaragdina, conjured from thin air to serve this place. One of 41 gods, whose work created everything you see here, including us. Only a god in the stories of the 6 great gods, the players, as they called themselves, there was a servant who called itself a created being. Just one. You're telling me that this..." She looked around the tranquil paradise outside her husband's home, but before she could speak, Ainz corrected her. "You were inside, Kalka. Underground," Ainz said with a tender touch to her shoulder. But the sky? The wind?" Kalka asked as her heart pounded like a drum. Ainz smiled with wistful memories passing through his mind as he looked around the idyllic scene. "My friends and I made it. Blue Planet was the architect, Bukabaku Shagama made the forest, her brother made the lake, added the wind. If you wait carefully, you'll notice the smell of honeysuckle begins. It cycles through the smells of various flowering plants, to nothing, and back again. My dear friend Tabula did the sky. All of us did something, all of us created someone. You created someone. Not a golem, but truly living a living being." Kalka squeaked. "Yes, I suppose you could think of him as my son. He's a bit dramatic, and for some reason he cannot stop occasionally speaking German, but he is growing into himself, you could say," Ainz said and forced himself not to cringe, instead keeping his expression steady and sure. "You have another son. And didn't tell me?" Kalka said with dismay. "Shouldn't you tell your wife something like that?" she exclaimed, and then she felt the stare in the back of her head. "You are learning it now. I would have said something sooner, but how do you tell anyone any of this?" Ainz asked and shook his head while he shrugged, removing his hand from her shoulder. "Oh, by the way dear, I created someone out of nothing and my other wife was created out of nothing too," Ainz said it teasingly, and Kalka blushed when she realized his point. "Even if I said it, until you saw this place, would you have believed it?" Ainz asked pointedly, and she lowered her eyes. No, probably not. However, I reserve my wifely right to be miffed," Kalka retorted, cracking a teasing little grin back at him. "So, what happens now? If everything you say is true, and I can't doubt it, not having seen both this place and your magic firsthand, what am I but a human? An insect? Even a queen is nothing when set against a god." The teasing smile became fragile as she lost her will to maintain it, and it was Albedo who spoke up. "That, per my lord's will, falls to you. You may keep it secret, or you may announce his godhood to your whole nation. You sacrificed much for him to bear Aurelian." Sparked by Albedo's words, Kalka touched the snow-white hair that replaced the once golden blonde, which no cosmetic magic seemed to work on. Things fell into place which previously were insensible. His birth, no wonder it was so hard. I birthed a godkin. I will keep it secret for now. I need time to process this," Kalka said and again looked at the little elf twins, such perfect-looking children. She drew her knees up against her chest and put her arms around her legs. "I don't know how to think, how to feel. I suppose it explains your indifference to my skeleton eye? I thought I was just lucky," she chuckled wryly. "I suppose I was." She snorted after that. I think this makes me happy. It means my son, our son, will be strong. It means unlimited power will protect him. It means my country will be secure. I can't find a downside here except that I'm only a human. I can never be the peer, the equal of a god." A few minutes ago I was convinced that you were just like me, a powerful monarch and magic caster. Now I find out the impossible. Are you going to be all right? Ainz asked of her, and offered out their son in both hands. She took the boy, who stirred only a little until he was nestled against his mother's breast. Yes, I will be. This is just going to take time, Kalka promised, but I want to see the rest of your home. The truth is, I can hardly wait. Brain's eyes adjusted to the darkness almost immediately. Ahead of him he saw the gate of the manor, and from the shadows he watched while the guards patrolled in silence. They were few in number, though they were well armed, with plate mail armor, good spears, and short swords at their waists just in case the spear was inadequate. If I could manage it, I might get good money for their gear. He chuckled at the thought. He'd heard stories of thieves and bandits so skilled that they could strip their victims naked without them even being noticed. He counted it a load of hogwash, but it was always amusing to think about. For the dedicated swordsman, however, there was only one way to work. He watched the guards for hours to be sure they wouldn't be replaced, and then he acted. Perfect aim, acceleration, lesser agility boost. He used the martial arts with confidence that there would be none to counter him. There were two things he could always count on with a slain theocracy. The first was that their strongest fighters never worked for private citizens. The second was that neither their private citizens nor the guards they did hire were exceptionally worried about being robbed. It was a security theater, little better than a stage play to a skilled thief, and barely better for a skilled swordsman. Brain took a step forward, then was gone from his position, and two heads spun away into the darkness, and the bodies of two guards fountained blood out of their necks, spasmed, and fell into a clanking heap where they died. The drops of blood his sword acquired flew off out of view, and he sheathed his sword. He reached for the corpse and rustled around in the pouch on the body's waist until he felt the outline of the metal key. Idiots, he thought, and snatching it into his fumbling fingers he lit out for the door. The guards were few enough that he felt no real worry that the bodies would be found. They are even less vigilant than those stupid bandits I used to lead. At least we rotated shifts so that somebody would notice if a corpse was left behind. These just walk the same paths. Ugh, it's almost professionally offensive how sloppy people are. Brain thought and slipped into the house when the lock clicked and the door opened. If it was dark outside, it was pitch black inside, but he breathed slowly and let his body adjust until it might as well have been daylight. While he was no master thief, moving quietly was something he could do reasonably well. His feet carried him padding slowly down a long dark hall of burgundy-stained wood. On the wall hung priceless paintings. Brain passed them by. On pedestals of marble stood priceless vases. Brain cared nothing for those. Instead, Brain went down the stairs, keeping his feet close to the rail so that his weight wouldn't cause the creaking that tended to come from walking in the middle. Predictable, he thought as he reached the upper floor. That was the thing about theocracy homes. While the port tended to be quite variable, the higher up you went in society, the more uniform it became until only the most mild differences remained in actual decor. The dining hall was his destination, and as he expected, it was a large, cavernous room, laid on the lower floor with a space dug into the side of the earth with windows arcing up so that the morning and evening sun would flood the room with light from an upward angle as if the diners were being blessed by divine light. As it was, the moonlight cast its glow within, and Brain made straight for cabinets along the wall, glassed in as they were. He could see his prizes. Spoons, knives, and forks of pure silver, each one alone had to be worth 50 coins just for the artistry behind them. More importantly, nobody can possibly trace them, he thought with smug confidence as he snatched them and tossed them into his traveling pouch. As a bonus, these residents, to his surprise, had several sets of gold utensils. It's my lucky day, he muttered while holding a spoon up to the moonlight. Only for his breath to catch at what he saw reflected in the curve of the spoon. A slender half-elf walking into the dining hall. Zashi? What the hell is she doing here? He wondered with alarm, and throwing the spoon into the pouch, he spun on his heel and made for the windows.